I have a pretty interesting article here I decided I'd cover. Veteran journalist Chris Wallace said he became a bit bored with politics after years of political coverage, leading him to his CNN show that incorporates different interests and guests from different backgrounds. Wallace said on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher on Friday that he was not bored during the Trump administration because it was always interesting despite it being a show. He said someone was responsible for monitoring tweets while he hosted in Fox News Sunday because something would change between the time he arrived at the studio at 6 a.m. and when his show started at 9 a.m. Wallace said he spent a lot of time in 2021 slicing the salami thinner and thinner about the marginal difference between different versions of policy proposals like President Biden's Build Back Better plan, and it became kind of a bore. Wallace left Fox News last year after hosting the network's main Sunday morning news show for 2 decades. Wallace was first slated to host a show on CNN's now defunct streaming platform CNN Plus. However, after new ownership of the company was announced, CNN Plus was shut down. Who's Talking to Chris Wallace now airs on both CNN and HBO. Maher responded that Biden and Build Back Better are boring, but the political process is supposed to be a bore. That's why we elected him, Maher said, referring to Biden. Let's get back to boring and normal. Wallace asserted that boring is not good as a host of a Sunday talk show. He added that he is interested in a lot of stuff and pointed to Maher having a mix of guests on Real Time. The lineup for Wallace's show, which airs weekly on CNN Sunday nights, is set to feature a wide range of guests inside and outside of politics, including former Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, former baseball player Alex Rodriguez, and singer Shania Twain. I think that's her last name. So this is interesting to me because, in a lot of ways, Wallace is saying something that I've heard stated a couple of times, and Maher is also saying something about how Trump was this extremely, whether you liked him or disliked him, was in these 4 years of this really interesting period where anything could happen any day of the week, and that Biden being, I guess, less charismatic and less prone to doing things that aren't considered normal is not as interesting. But I don't really believe, because here's the thing: you have people who really were only tuned into this stuff because Trump would tweet about someone and call them some name or whatever, or some tweets basically was like the highlight of their stuff. As far as policy proposals, I mean, you're really not seeing that much of a difference. You had Trump have his major agenda that didn't really get anywhere except for that tax cut, and you have Biden doing the same thing, but because there's no tweets that are being seen as insane, it's not as susceptible to being as gone after or as addressed or covered as Trump stuff was. But I really do agree with Walt. Like I don't know if I particularly share his sentiments. However, I do understand where covering this stuff can be boring. Because sometimes there's some new bill that's being talked about, and they put the whole thing up, and of course you're not going to read the whole thing. You have people that talk about the minutia of this bill is this much billion. It allocates funds to this. I understand where reading that stuff can to an average, regular, normal person can be boring. And sure enough, I've had several bouts where I was disinterested in politics. The most recent example being during the start of the COVID saga, 2 years ago, where it seemed like every single day and week and month, the only thing anyone was talking about was the damn virus. And I became so tired of it because one of the things I actually like about politics or the various topics that are covered, sometimes you have domestic policy, sometimes you have relations with other countries, sometimes you have different, senators, governors, etc. To me, it's interesting how like I've always felt there was a natural variety that really was missing during the start of this virus that made me. I still covered it, whatever, but I didn't find it as interesting as it normally was for me, which of course is considered like an abnormal thing to be as interested. But whatever. I take it on the chin. But I do understand where he became bored, like where somebody who could follow this stuff year after year can just progressively just get fatigued and tired of it. And even sometimes with me, I still have periods where I just stop watching or reading stuff about it for maybe a few. I there's never I don't I At most there might be a day or two where I don't read the news, but even though I still get like notifications on my phone. But there are a couple of weeks, maybe a month, where I don't watch any of my like the different news channels, for example, on YouTube. But I don't know. It's like I don't really quit it, even during those like lull periods. But I do pay less attention to it for some period that might be brief, like a couple of days, might be a little bit longer, a couple of weeks, a month, and then I come back to it, just regularly. Um, and like I said, I'm a person who has a lot of different interests, just like Wallace does. But I don't fault him for wanting to do a show that also shows his different interests. And that's one of the saddest things about being successful enough to even be on a network, that you have to always meet this bottom line. Like the one good thing that YouTube has is that regardless if people unsubscribe, regardless if people don't watch, regardless if people don't leave any comments, you get to talk about whatever you want in whatever video you like to upload, Monday through Sunday, 24/7. Whenever, that's the one thing this site has over being. That's the one thing being a content creator has over being someone who's for a network. And you have to imagine 20 years of running the same show, where every day the news, the news, the news, the news, the news. I can completely understand where it just became so mundane. You just get sick of it, the same thing over and over. I guess for me, my interest is something where, because of how varied it is for me as a topic, whereas I mentioned earlier, the different policy issues that get discussed and various recurring figures in it, I tend to have an easier time staying interested. Um, but it's hard to just constantly just keep at it. So I understand him. But the other thing I was going to get on is Mar for trying to say, oh, it's supposed to be boring. Well, the one thing I liked about Trump's tenure, from the standpoint of someone that was just watching the house burn down, was that it seemed like a lot of people who normally weren't engaged with the political process cared at least a smidge, a little bit. So if people are going to tune out because of, like, I guess I just don't believe that if something is important and it's covered in a way that is interesting or that's otherwise informative, it could be brief, etc., that people are just supposed to not care. They're just supposed to be, or if they do care, just be bored. Because most of the news stories I read, which are like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I'm not bored reading those. I guess it's just an acquired taste type of thing, but I really do believe that this stuff doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be inaccessible. People just have to do a better job of reporting it. And I think a lot of news stations are not entertaining, um, outside of when they make some blooper or some kind of unintended thing that messes them up. But what I'm getting at is this stuff doesn't have to be this way. It can be fun. It can be exciting, and it's been able to be that way for me for a long time. And I really don't fault Wallace for reaching that point of just, all right, I don't want to do this anymore. Even though, like I said, uh, I don't know. It's just it's something where I empathize with them. I kind of get it, as far as like I understand where you could get sick of this, but it just seems strange to me that you could do that show for that long and then only suddenly now like, all right, well, I'm tired of this, So I don't know. I might have been rambling here, but I thought the topic was interesting because it's one of those things of how often do we take a break from the stuff that we find interesting? Because at some point or another, you probably do get fatigued with something that you do every day, or just just constantly. Just everybody just gets like a break period of, all right, that's enough.